couple times a year, we have a group of people from the church who get together and help us think about the things we should do in worship, the topics we should look at, the things we might focus on. In the 2 years I've been here, there's been a couple topics that come up pretty much every time we gather. The first is the topic of hope. I think we're all looking for hope, and so we try to talk about hope throughout every year. The second topic is one that came up more recently and then reappeared as we were planning for this fall. And it was the topic around how do we get along in the midst of such a divided world? Well, the first time the topic was brought up, we did a sermon series called But We Don't See Eye to Eye. And we did that sermon series in February. Now, this fall, we're doing a part 2. We'll take 3 more weeks to talk about this important topic. And for me, there's a little bit of a tagline for the part 2. And it's a verse that comes from 1 Corinthians 12. And it's this: a more excellent way. Now, 1 Corinthians 12 is a chapter that talks about division and people struggling to get along. And Paul says to them, yeah, all this stuff is going on, but I have for you a more excellent way. That's where the line comes from. And then in 1 Corinthians 13, Paul spends the bulk of that chapter talking about love. You may be familiar with that chapter. That's the one that says love is patient, love is kind. So the more excellent way that Paul is talking about is the way of love. Christian spirituality, how we as people of faith live, has to be centered on love. And I think we all crave love. We all crave the wonderfulness that happens when we live in a place, in a time with people where there is love. And we know that when there is not, when there is dissension, when there is fighting, when there is disunity, we yearn for something more. Let's start off with our text that talks about the blessing and the yearning that we have for unity. This is Psalm 133, and Eddie will read it for us.
How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. It is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. For there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life evermore. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
This is a psalm that's talking about how unity is a blessing. It feels like an amazing blessing when we are united with people around us. And the text uses a couple images. It talks about unity as a precious oil, unity as the dew on the mountains, a blessing from God, something that we all want. But it's hard to find unity when we don't see eye to eye. Over these 3 weeks, I want to talk about all of this, how we might see eye to eye better. And I realize that as we talk about some of these things, that for some of you, they might feel political. Now, I know that in general we are told, do not talk religion and do not talk politics with people. Well, we talk religion every week here. And so I don't know if we add in something that might feel political to some of you, if they cancel each other out or if there's some kind of an explosion. We'll just have to see. Now, when we talk about politics in today's world, usually what we're talking about is bipartisan politics, right? We're talking about people having very strong feelings about very particular things and all the yelling that happens around that. It reminds me of when I was a new pastor serving in my first church. A man came by with a whole pile of leaflets, and he told me that this was the list of how people should vote in the coming election. He told me that I should put these in our Sunday bulletin so that all the people in my church would know the Christian way to vote. I explained to him that I didn't see it that way, that in fact I felt that Christians voted in all different kinds of ways, and that I was not going to be distributing his leaflet. He spent about 20 minutes explaining to me how wrong I was, and how there was really only one Christian way to vote, and that this was it. Now, when we talk over these weeks over some things that might feel to you political, know that we're not talking about politics in the way we talk about it commonly. We're really talking about community. We're talking about how we get along with each other, how we relate to each other, how we are responsible for each other. That's a much wider understanding of politics, a much wider understanding of community. That's what our focus will be. How I see it is that my role as a pastor is never to tell you what to think about politics. You're going to think what you think. You're going to vote how you vote. I think my role, my job in all this, is to help you take whatever it is you think and bring it into relationship with your faith. So to think about, am I thinking this way or voting that way because of my own desires, or is God in this? Is the kingdom of God and in what Jesus has done for us, is that part of my decision? Or is my faith not even involved? I want to help you think faithfully about your faith. I want to help you think about your politics in a way that lines up with the gospel. And let me say this. I know that that means that there might be some things I say over the next couple weeks that don't sit great with you, that make you feel like you've been pushed a bit. And just know that's on purpose. Any of us who seek the way of Jesus will be pushed past our comfort level, past what we might normally do, called to a bigger vision of the world. So while I don't relish the idea, I know that I've been pushed past where I'm comfortable, and probably we all are going to be pushed past where we're comfortable as we try to take our faith and connect it with our politics. So, let me explain to you a little bit of how I think about all of these topics. And I share this because this guides my conversation, and I hope it might guide yours too. So I have two principles that I use in times when I don't see eye to eye with people. And the first one is this. I value relationships over agreement. I value relationships over agreement. Now, what I mean by that is that I value you, not because I agree with you, not because we see things the same way, but because I have a relationship with you, and I prioritize that. I know that sometimes we don't agree with people we love. And what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't have to agree in order to care for each other. We don't have to agree for us to love each other. I value my relationship with you and with everyone in my community way more than I value or care about our differences and our disagreements. Now, I realize that might be a little bit of a strange way to be, and probably the reason I am like this is because I grew up in a family where my dad loved to have debates at dinner. We would discuss all kinds of things, and we would take different sides, and we would debate it, and we would say what we thought, and then at the end of the meal, we'd be fine. We would be able to navigate through that because we knew we didn't have to agree in order for us to love each other, in order for us to build a life together, in order for us to have a good time together. So that's the first thing. I value relationships over agreements. And this is the second thing, and I've already kind of hinted at this. I value Jesus' kingdom over my comfort. What I mean by that is I try to look at what Jesus valued, what Jesus said was important, what he came to bring to this world. It is human nature for us to focus just on ourselves, on our own family, on what we want. Jesus called us to something more. Some of Jesus' teachings included things like his call to life and life abundant, and his saying that the people who are in and who are out are not always the people we think, and that weak is the new strong, and that everyone gets a second and a third and a fourth chance at this, and that love is what wins. So when I see things in the world that are at odds with the way of Jesus, I try to engage with that. And most of the time, I am not very comfortable in doing so. One thing I want to say about this, because I think this is an important point of clarification, is that you and I, we might agree on Jesus' teachings, but how we think they should be lived out might be different. For example, let's say that I care a lot about prison reform because I understand Jesus' teaching about redemption and getting more chances to be important. And you might also think prison reform matters. But how we think that should be lived out, well, that might be different, depending on who we are, depending on where we stand. The bigger idea here is that we value Jesus' teaching so much that we let it push us past our comfort. We let it push us past what we like and our family likes, and hear the call to care for people, hear the call to go that extra mile, even when it costs us. Even when it makes our life more difficult. So these are the two statements that guide me. And I hope that they help you as you think over these weeks and in the coming months how to get along with people and how to find some unity in the midst of this time. So valuing relationships over agreement, and valuing Jesus' kingdom over our comfort. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about racial justice this morning. What I believe racial justice to be about is that I believe that my faith calls me to work for a world where the color of our skin, where we grew up, what our background is, doesn't stop anyone from having access to a full and equal life, to justice, to safety, to happiness, to advancement. Now, you may wonder why this should matter to you. If you are a person of color, maybe it matters a lot. But if you're someone of European ancestry, maybe you're thinking, well, why does this really matter to me? I mean, not too long ago, someone who I love and respect said, you know what? With everything that's going on in the world, with COVID and the kids not being in school and dealing with unemployment and dealing with just all the stress and the mental health issues of this time, I just don't have the bandwidth to think about racial justice. Okay. I get it. But let me tell you why you should push past that and why it should matter to us all, no matter who we are, and no matter where we sit in this culture and world. It should matter to us all for this simple and profound reason that we are all created in the image of God, and that there is not a hierarchy of some people who are greater and some people who are lesser. All people are equal in God's sight. All people matter the same, regardless of your ethnicity, or your race, your nationality, your status, your gender, all of those things. Heaven will be full of people of every race and every nation. And so this side of heaven, we are all called to take this core gospel principle that how we interact with each other matters to God very seriously. Diversity is actually God's plan. God made a very diverse world, and God did this on purpose. God called us into relationship with people unlike us. And I know that that is a challenge for most of us because most of us are very comfortable with people who are like us and more suspicious or worried about people who are different than us. You know, if we look at our friends, we might see that. For many of us, our friends look like us. The people we have over for dinner at our house have a similar background or similar age, similar race, similar education, similar economic level than us. Not all of us, but many of us. I had a really funny experience around this myself. I did a 7-day silent retreat last year. And at the end of the retreat, we were told to look for somebody that we wanted to break our silence with. And so I looked all around the room. There was like 1,000 people there. And I saw this one guy, and I went over to him, and we talked. And wouldn't you know it, he's the only other United Methodist clergy person in the room of 1,000 people. Like, how did I even know that? There's nothing wrong with looking for people that we connect with, people that we have a similar background to. But one of the things that we're called to is way more than that as followers of Christ. So, why should we care? We should care because all people are created in God's image. And since all people are created in God's image, justice for all people matters. Second part of this, which is very similar, with just a little added on, is that we should care because all people are created in God's image, and we are all in this together. Now, I say that because the church in general has not done a very good job at talking about divisions, talking about race, talking about these kinds of issues. Sunday morning, it continues to be one of the most segregated hours of the entire week. Churches oftentimes think that a topic like this is too political or not really central. Interestingly, Billy Graham, at the end of his ministry, was asked, what is the greatest social problem of this time? Now, he had more than 40 years in ministry, and he said that the greatest social problem, without question, is racism. He lifted up the unhealed wounds of racial injustice. Our work as people of faith isn't just to make sure our own family's doing fine, but it's to be engaged with the wider community and to care about all people, for we all bear the image of God. Recently, I read a really interesting article in the LA Times. It was about the city of Manhattan Beach. Manhattan Beach is about 50 miles from Valencia. It's a coastal town. It's actually my husband's hometown. In 1912, Willa Bruce purchased the first of 2 parcels in Manhattan Beach in an area called the Strand. And she and her husband, Charles, ran a popular lodge and cafe and dance hall for Black families that would come down to the coast on the weekend to escape the heat. As their business grew, more Black families moved in to Manhattan Beach. But history records that the people of Manhattan Beach, mostly a white enclave at the time, struggled with the Black families moving into their community. Soon, tires were slashed. The Ku Klux Klan showed up, and homes were burnt to the ground. Finally, the city condemned the neighborhood and seized more than 24 properties through eminent domain. The article talked about the aftermath of all this and how pain and anger surround the Bruce family and others who were excluded from the community because of their race. Now, why should we care about this? We should care about this because we're people of faith. And when any group of people is excluded from anything because of race, it should matter to us all. I'd like to close our time with a moment of silence for reflection and for decision, so that each of us might think about what it is that God is calling us to as people of faith in this time. It may be that we need to repent and adopt a more excellent way. It may be that we need to look at our friend group and see its lack of diversity and be committed to more. I don't know what it is for you, but I believe that God has led us to this moment so we would all step up and be committed to the things that God calls us to as people of faith. So let us take a moment for reflection, and then I'll close us in prayer.